Senator Corman.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The government will not be supporting this motion. What this motion by the Labour Party shows to the Australian people is just how cocky, how reckless, how irresponsible and how weak Bill Shorten is as leader of the Labour Party. Bill Shorten is demonstrating to all Australians that he does not have the strength of character or the good judgment required to be Prime Minister of Australia. In pursuit of a short-term tactical political advantage, he has decided to compromise our national security and to compromise our border protection arrangements. What Labor is doing here today is trying to ram through the Senate legislation which will weaken our border protection arrangements. And let's just remind ourselves what the Labour Party tried to do in the Senate, very incompetently, I might add, back in December. Back in December, the Labour Party tried to ram through the Senate legislation which Bill Shorten yesterday had to admit would have denied the opportunity for the government to turn away criminals from Australia, would have put the pull factor back at the heart of our border protection arrangements, which of course is a product that the people smugglers want to sell. I mean, why did Bill Shorten move amendments yesterday? Because he realised that having failed to ask for security advice from our national security agencies, with a failed gag motion in the Senate in December last year, he convinced his Labour senators in this chamber to support legislation which he had to admit in the end would have put our border security arrangements at serious risk. And let me just say that the ALP amendments which were passed by Labor, the Greens and the crossbench in the Reps yesterday still leave Australia exposed. Here are some of the kinds of people whom the Minister would be forced to bring to Australia on the say-so of doctors under the Labor amendments. People charged with bad conduct but not convicted of offences under foreign law, or convicted but sentenced to less than 12 months in prison. Plenty of countries hand down pretty lenient sentences for things like beating your wife or paedophilia, if they hand down any sentence at all. It is very hard to convict people of things like rape in some countries because women's testimony is worth much less than that of men. A person charged but not sentenced for, say, murder or paedophilia on Nauru will not be caught by the exemption. Australian security agencies might be well aware of a person engaging in paedophilia on Nauru, but the person need not have been charged or sentenced. The upshot is that as a result of Bill Shorten's bill, and it will be on his head, as a result of Bill Shorten's bill, rapists, murderers and pedophiles will still get a free pass into this country. Bill Shorten should be ashamed of himself. He should be ashamed of himself. People involved in criminal organisations. A person might be a member of a criminal drug-dealing gang, for example. People reasonably suspected of people smuggling. All people that would be forced onto Australia courtesy of the legislation that Labor is seeking to ram through the Senate. People whose general past conduct shows they are not of good character. For example, people who consort with criminals, people whose bad conduct is not criminalised in the relevant home jurisdiction, people who have been convicted of a lot of low-level offences, people who have been fighting guards in Nauru or Manus, people who have touched up nurses, people who have threatened violence, people who have bragged about going into crime and drug dealing when they get to Australia. These are the people that the Labor Party, together with the Greens, wants to bring into Australia. People who have incited racial discord on Nauru or Manus. People who pose a risk of doing the following in Australia: engage in criminal conduct in Australia, or harass, molest, intimidate or stalk another person in Australia, or vilify a segment of the Australian community, or incite discord in the Australian community or in a segment of that community, or represent a danger to the Australian community or to a segment of that community, whether by way of being liable to become involved in activities that are disruptive to or in violence threatening harm to that community or segment, or in any other way. So the Australian people can now see the cockiness of Bill Shorten. They can see his arrogance, as well as his recklessness, his absolute weakness in standing up for our national interests. Bill Shorten Bill Shorten has not learned from the failures of the Rudd Labour government. Kevin Rudd thought that he could be tough and soft at the same time, and of course the disastrous results were there for all to see. 1,200 deaths at sea. Labour is at it again. This time they don't even want to wait for an election.